What pushes a man to risk everything on the world's highest peak, only to face a choice that could bury him forever? In 1996, two climbers stood on Everest's summit, but one decision would change their fate and a chilling discovery would reveal a truth no one expected. Hey, don't forget to like, please subscribe for more shocking crime stories and hit the bell icon. The darkest truth are yet to come. May 10, 1996. The air on Mount Everest is so thin it claws at your lungs. Every breath a battle against the mountain's indifference. At 29,029 feet, the summit is a siren's call, luring climbers with dreams of glory and spitting them back broken or not at all. Rob Hall, a 35-year-old New Zealander with a quick grin and unshakable grit, stood at base camp, staring up at the peak he'd conquered 4 times before. He wasn't just a mountaineer, he was a pioneer, leading adventure consultants, a company that turned Everest into a goal for those with enough cash and courage. But this season felt heavier. The mountain was restless, the crowds thicker, and Rob carried a promise that weighed more than his pack to bring his team home alive. Rob's group was a patchwork of ambition. Doug Hansen, a 46-year-old postal worker from Seattle, was the everyman of the team. With a weathered face and quiet resolve, Doug had saved $65,000 for this climb, a dream born from a 1995 attempt that ended 100 meters short of the summit. That failure gnawed at him, a wound he couldn't leave unhealed. "This is my last shot, Rob," he said, his voice steady but eyes desperate. Rob nodded, hiding his worry. Doug's strength was fading with age, and Everest didn't care about second chances. Base camp, perched at 17,600 feet, hummed with tension. Tents flapped in the wind. Sherpas hauled oxygen canisters, and climbers tested their gear. Rob's wife, Jan Arnold, was back in New Zealand, pregnant with their first child. She'd climbed with him before summiting Everest in 1993, but this time she'd stayed behind, whispering, "Come back to us." Rob tucked a photo of their unborn daughter into his jacket, her blurry ultrasound image, a talisman against the mountain's wrath. But as he scanned the horizon, unease settled in his bones. Weather reports hinted at a storm brewing, a shadow over the Himalayas. Rob wasn't alone on the mountain. Scott Fisher, an American guide with a rockstar charm, led a rival team, Mountain Madness, including journalist John Crack. The two groups planned to stagger their summit push, but Everest was a choke point. Over 30 climbers from various expeditions would crowd the summit ridge on May 10th. A dangerous mix of egos and oxygen tanks in the death zone above 26,000 feet. The body starts to die, cell by cell, without extra air. The night of May 9th, Rob's team left Camp 4 at 26,000 feet, their headlamps cutting through the dark. Wind screamed across the ice, biting through their suits. Rob led the way, followed by Doug. Yasuko Namba, a 47-year-old Japanese woman chasing the 7 summits, and others, including guide Andy Harris. Sherpas, Lopsang, Jangbu and Ang Dorje fixed ropes ahead, their silhouettes ghostly in the moonlight. Doug moved like he was dragging chains, his breath shallow, but his jaw was set. "You've got this, mate," Rob said, gripping his shoulder. They didn't know they were walking into a trap set by the mountain itself. The summit push was brutal. Each step sank into snow, each breath burned. The Hillary Step, a near-vertical rock wall just below the summit, loomed like a judge. By noon the route was a mess. Other teams clogged the fixed ropes, slowing everyone. Everest to Golden Rule is merciless. Summit by 2 p.m. or turn back, no matter how close you are. After that, darkness and low oxygen turned the descent into a gamble with death. Rob checked his watch. 1:30 p.m., looked at Doug, who was gasping but pushing on. "We're so close," Doug said, his voice cracking. Rob's instincts screamed to retreat, but Doug's dream was right there, shimmering in the ice. At 1:55 p.m., Rob and Doug reached the summit. The world fell away below, a tapestry of clouds and peaks stretching to infinity. Doug dropped to his knees, his glove brushing the snow. "I made it," he whispered, tears freezing on his face. Rob forced a smile, but his eyes flicked to the sky. Black clouds rolled in, swallowing the light. "We need to go, now," he said, hauling Doug up. Yasuko and others summited too, their joy fleeting. The storm was no longer a rumor, it was here, and they were out of time. The descent was a nightmare. Snow blinded them, wind gusts threatening to rip them off the mountain. Doug's legs buckled. He'd spent everything on the climb. Rob stayed by his side, clipping him to the ropes. "One step, Doug, just one," he said, his voice a lifeline. At the south summit, 28,700 feet, Andy Harris radioed base camp. "Rob's With Doug, moving slow, Scott Fisher's team, nearby, was unraveling. Scott himself lagged, drained from helping clients. The death zone was tightening its grip, and no one could outrun it. By 4 p.m., the blizzard roared in, a white wall of fury. Winds hit 70 miles per hour. Temperatures plummeted to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Doug could barely stand, his oxygen mask crusted with ice. Rob tethered himself to him, refusing to let go. "We're getting down together," he said, though fear flickered in his chest. Andy Harris, confused by the altitude, wandered off after trying to help. Yasuko vanished in the chaos, collapsing. Somewhere below, the mountain was picking them off, and Rob faced a choice that would define him forever. Down at base camp, Helen Wilton gripped the radio, her heart in her throat. Rob's voice crackled through. "Doug's in bad shape. I'm with him above the south summit." Helen begged. "Rob, you have to descend," Static answered. Other climbers staggered into camp, frostbitten and broken, but Rob and Doug were still up there. Scott Fisher was missing too. Night fell, a black curtain over hope. What was happening in that frozen hell? Dawn broke on May 11th, the storm still raging. Rob's radio flickered on, his voice faint. "I'm with Doug. He's not moving." Base camp froze. Rob had spent the night exposed above 28,000 feet. No tent, no oxygen, yet he stayed, tied to Doug, who hadn't stirred since midnight. "Jan, I love her," he said, his words slurring. The team urged him to climb down, but he wouldn't budge. Was there any way they could still make it? A rescue was a fantasy. Sherpas spent from their own climb couldn't reach the south summit. In the storm, climbers like John Krakauer, safe at camp, were haunted by the screams they couldn't answer in the wind. Rob's loyalty to Doug was ironclad, but it was killing him. At noon, Rob radioed again, barely audible. "Doug's gone." Had he died in the night? Or was there more to it? The truth was locked in the ice, waiting to be found. Rob's voice grew weaker through the day. "I'm not doing well," he admitted. The words a knife to base camp's heart. They patched through Jan in New Zealand. "I'll be home soon. Love," Rob said, a promise he knew he couldn't keep. Jan's sobs echoed across the static. By evening, his radio fell silent. 8 climbers, including Rob, Doug, Scott, Yasuko, and Andy, were lost or dead. The mountain had won, but it wasn't done telling their story. Days later, the storm cleared, and Everest revealed its toll. Searchers spotted Rob and Doug near the south summit, frozen like statues, but retrieving them was too dangerous. They became part of the mountain, a warning to others. Yet something glinted in the snow beside Rob, something that didn't belong. What was it? And why would it turn their tragedy into a mystery that lingered for years? 2 men reached Everest summit, chasing a dream that became a nightmare. Rob Hall refused to leave Doug Hansen, even as the mountain closed in. Days later, a strange find near their bodies hinted at a truth no one saw coming. What was it? May 12, 1996, Mount Everest looms like a silent judge. Its slopes scarred by the blizzard that stole 8 lives. Rob Hall and Doug Hansen lie frozen near the south summit, their dreams buried in snow. At base camp, survivors cling to fragments of hope, but the mountain holds a secret, a glinting object beside Rob that could unravel what happened in the death zone. The world waits, breathless, for answers to a tragedy that's only beginning to reveal its truth. John Krakauer, a journalist who barely survived the climb, sits in a tent, his hands shaking as he writes. His words will become into thin air, a book that immortalizes the disaster. Helen Wilton, Rob's team coordinator, stares at the radio, replaying his last words. "Doug's gone." Her voice cracks as she whispers, "He wouldn't leave him." The climbing community is shattered. Rob, the guide who made Everest a dream for ordinary people, is now its most gut-wrenching lesson. But what was that strange find next to him, and why does it matter? The 1996 disaster wasn't just a storm, it was a collision of human ambition and nature's wrath. Over 30 climbers from multiple teams choked the summit route on May 10th, turning the Hillary Step into a deadly traffic jam. Ropes tangled, oxygen dwindled, and the 2 p.m. turnaround ruler lifeline on Everest was ignored. Rob's team, like Scott Fisher's, gambled on clear skies that never came. The blizzard struck with biblical force, and Rob's choice to stay with Doug wasn't about logic. It was about a promise, no client left behind. That vow became his grave. Doug Hansen's story cuts deeper than most. A postal worker with 2 kids, he'd worked grueling shifts to scrape together $65,000 for this climb. His 1995 failure, turning back so close to the summit, left a scar he couldn't ignore. "I can't live with that again," he'd told friends, his voice heavy. Rob, who'd guided him then, carried a quiet guilt for that defeat. He saw Doug's heart, his hunger to prove himself. But above 28,000 feet, heart alone couldn't outrun the death zone's math. Doug's collapse on the descent was inevitable, and Rob's refusal to leave him sealed their fates. Search teams braved the slopes after the storm cleared, their eyes scanning the south col for signs of the lost. On May 13th, they found Rob and Doug frozen against the ice like statues of a forgotten war. Rob slumped near a rock, a rope still clipped to Doug, who lay curled a few feet away. Frost masked their faces, locking them in their final moments. The sight broke the searchers' hearts. But then one Sherpa paused, pointing to something half buried in the snow. It shimmered faintly, out of place in the desolation. What was it? The object was Rob's oxygen regulator, tossed aside near his body. At first, it looked like debris climbers often shed gear in their final delirious moments. But when experts later examined it, a chilling detail emerged. The regulator still held oxygen, its valve functional. Why had Rob discarded it? Had he tried to give it to Doug, hoping to spark life in his client? Or was he so ravaged by hypothermia, his mind clouded by altitude, that he'd made a fatal mistake? This small piece of metal turned a tragedy into a mystery, fueling debates that echoed across mountaineering circles. Rob's radio logs, pieced together at base camp, added more questions. At 4:43 a.m. on May 11th, he'd said, "Doug's gone," his voice hollow. Yet he stayed through the night, exposed to winds that could freeze blood, for nearly 24 hours more. Some called it heroism, a guide's ultimate duty. Others saw it as reckless, a choice that cost more lives. John Krakauer, wrestling with his own survival guilt, wrote that Rob's bond with Doug and his failure to get him to the summit in '95 kept him tethered to that spot. The regulator, though, suggested something unspoken, a sacrifice made in the dark with no one to see, that the disaster laid bare Everest's cruel dilemmas. Climbers passing Rob and Doug, like those who encountered others in distress, faced choices no one should. Anatoly Balkriv, a guide on Scott Fisher's team, saved 3 clients but couldn't reach Rob in the storm. It was impossible, he said later, his eyes haunted. Sherpas, risking their own lives, turned back from the south summit, their oxygen nearly gone. On Everest, survival is a zero-sum game. Save another, and you might not save yourself. Rob's decision to stay wasn't just personal. It exposed the razor's edge of loyalty in a place that forgives no one. News of the tragedy rippled across the globe, a shockwave that changed mountaineering forever. In New Zealand, Jan Arnold, Rob's wife, cradled her newborn daughter, Sarah, born months after his death. He died for what he believed in, she said, but grief choked her words. Doug's family received his gear, including a summit photo he'd carried, now brittle with frost. The climbing industry faced a reckoning. Rob and Scott's deaths spotlighted the risks of commercial expeditions, where clients paid fortunes to chase a peak that didn't care. Yet Everest's pull only grew, a magnet for dreamers undeterred by its body count. Rob and Doug's bodies stayed on the mountain, like so many before them, a grim fixture on the South Col route. Climbers passed them in the years that followed, some whispering prayers, others hurrying by, unnerved by their silent stares. Recovery was a pipe dream, $70,000 per body, with risks that could kill more. But in 1997, a Japanese expedition, led by Hiroshi Hanada, set out with a different mission. They weren't chasing the summit. They wanted to honor the mountain and its fallen. What they did would rewrite Rob and Doug's story and give peace to those left behind. Hiroshi's team reached the south summit in May 1997, battling winds as fierce as the '96 blizzard. They found Rob and Doug, their bodies preserved by the cold, gear scattered like offerings to a cruel god. Instead of moving on, they stopped. With Sherpa's help, they held a Shinto ceremony, draping prayer flags over the climbers. Then, in a move that stunned the climbing world, they acted. Rob's body was carefully shifted to a nearby crevasse, hidden from view, and covered with stones. Doug's, too brittle to move fully, was marked with a cairn of rocks. This wasn't just logistics, it was a reclaiming of dignity. Hiroshi spoke little of the effort. "The mountain deserves respect," he said simply, his voice soft but firm. The act divided climbers. Some saw it as noble, a gesture to humanize a place that strips away humanity. Others argued the bodies should stay, stark warnings to future expeditions. But for Jan and Doug's family, it was a bomb. "Rob's not a marker anymore," Jan said, her voice steady at last. The oxygen regulator, retrieved by Hiroshi's team, was sent for analysis, confirming its oxygen reserve. final piece of proof that Rob had fought for Doug until the end. The 1996 disaster carved a permanent mark on Everest's history. Over 900 climbers have died there since, each a story of ambition and loss. Rob's company, Adventure Consultants, lives on, its guides carrying his legacy. Doug's name endures in tales of ordinary people reaching for the impossible. The oxygen regulator, now displayed in a Christchurch museum, draws visitors who stand silent, wondering, was it a mistake or a choice? The answer lies in Rob's refusal to let go, a bond stronger than the storm. Hiroshi's quiet act did more than move bodies, it reshaped a narrative. Rob wasn't just a guide who miscalculated. He was a man who gave everything for his client. The Japanese team's compassion, like a flicker of light in the death zone, showed that even on Everest, humanity can rise above indifference. For Jan, Sarah, and Doug's children, it was closure truth more precious than any peak, that love and loyalty can endure where life cannot. Today, Everest remains a paradox, a beacon of dreams and a keeper of graves. Rob and Doug's story is a reminder that ambition can blind us, but devotion defines us. The 1996 storm took 8 souls, but it left a lesson: the bonds we forge, the sacrifices we make, and the courage to honor the fallen matter more than any summit. A Japanese climber's choice to stop, to care, revealed a truth that outshines. The mountains shadow a legacy of compassion carved in the ice. 2 men climbed Everest for a dream, only to face a nightmare. Rob Hall refused to abandon Doug Hansen, staying with him until the mountain claimed them both. A year later, a Japanese team's discovery an oxygen regulator with airlift, and their act of burial unveiled Rob's sacrifice and gave them rest. Their story isn't just a tragedy, it's a testament to loyalty and love, proof that even in the death zone, the best of us can climb higher. Or have you ever heard of a case like this? Comment your thoughts. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and catch you in the next one.